It's Life After Sunday, a podcast by dudes, for dudes, where faith meets the real world. For Luke Duvall and Mike Norman, I'm Chris Boren. Let's go. What is up, gentlemen? How are you guys?
Doing good.
And there was the pause right there.
There's the pause. I was waiting on
the pause. No, I was waiting on Eric. I thought you were going to do some.
I was waiting on you. You're waiting on me.
I was waiting on Eric to do a dramatic. I mean, he was going like this. I thought, man, this is going to be good.
I was waiting on Mike's official hello, gentlemen.
Let's hear yours, Eric. Let's go. How you going to do it?
How are you, sir? Good to see you today.
Hey, happy Friday.
Let's go,
y'all.
What's up?
What's up? Hey, you like the new shirt?
I feel like, did you wear that last week, or did I see you at a ball game wearing it?
I think Chris got it. Chris had his first.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah.
But is that accurate? Because we're not really gorilla balls. We just hit the ball and barely hit. We pitch good and we barely hit. I think I'm sorry, I don't want to get off on a baseball tangent.
Yeah, we'll get up. We're not doing baseball today.
Is that a fair assessment?
So I think
the SEC play, I think.
The gorilla thing came in from because we started putting the gorilla mask on someone when they hit a home run. But the term you're talking about, like if somebody's playing gorilla ball, it's Texas A&M. They're playing gorilla ball right now.
Yes, they're playing gorilla ball.
Oh, good Lord.
But
so is Kentucky too. But
yeah, Kentucky
don't get me going
good this weekend, man. Anyway,
don't get me going.
We're fixing to roll Kentucky, roll them up.
I hope so, sir.
We have a special guest on the show today, Mr. Luke Duvall.
Hello.
How are you, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here.
Good.
First
glad to have you.
Appearance.
Ever.
First ever.
Like we always say, you're on your way. You'll be on Joe Rogan next week because of this.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's the start to fame right here.
I'm sure.
Once our 96,000 viewers get a hold of you, get to listen to you, dude, look out.
Look out.
I think we had 65,000 on our live stream last week. Yeah.
You'll be getting interviews all over now, man. It's just there's nowhere but up from here.
I'll have to have my agent.
He's going to be on Fox News. Yeah, Fox News. They'll be calling him like, "Hey, Luke, can we get you in today, man? We need to talk about the Middle East."
Yeah,
you guest host the 5.
Yeah,
we've had somebody have a cancellation.
We heard you on that massive podcast, Life After Sunday. They're like blowing up, and we got to get you on. You know, since they had you on, they're the big thing, so we got to get you on.
Yeah.
Yep.
Goodness. Well, I'll have to get my
calendar
for all that.
The star is born. I'm going to give Mr. Luke a proper introduction. He is a follower of Jesus. He is a CPA. He is a very talented musician, worship leader. He is a young adults pastor. He is a husband. He's a dad. He's a good friend, and we're so happy to have you on the show and to hear your story, hear what you've been through in your life, and can't thank you enough for coming on.
Yeah, it's on.
First question right out of the gate. Yeah, first question right out of the gate is, if you could tell your 20-year-old self, college Luke, what would you tell him? If you could give him some advice.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, no pressure, bro.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Even
though you've had this question for a few days.
I was going to say, even behind the scenes here, Chris told me this was going to happen 2 days ago, and it was one of those where I just like, after he asked me the question, I just like was in the shower thinking, that's too deep. I have no idea. I was like, financial, emotional, spiritual, like, oh my gosh, how do I take this question? So I try not to overthink it too much. I would say probably the biggest thing that I have probably learned and would if my 20-year-old self could accept it, would be able to go back and tell would be priorities and prioritizing the right thing. And the reason is I learned somewhere that in there in my 20s that um, people do change, but not because you changed them. If somebody's going to change is they want to change, you don't try to force someone to change. And I've learned that in a spiritual walk. I've learned that in a relational walk, because there's been times where I've put max effort into somebody spiritually, trying to get them to change, trying to get them to live right, um, and and it seemed like the more effort I put into it, all that happened was we both got frustrated. Same thing relational wise. Of course, dating and all that. You start dating somebody, and there's a thing or two that you just don't really, love, and you think, oh well, I can change them. Well, you can't. They can change them. The Lord can change them, but you're not changing them. And if I could go back and tell the 20-year-old me, look, you can't change people. People change, but it's not solely because you put effort into them. It's because they wanted to change. Maybe you helped them change to who they wanted to already be. Um, and I say all that to say when my wife and I met, neither one of us were living right. I'll put it that way. Um, but she changed, and I didn't think I had a hand in that at all. I just was me. Um, and she totally changed from when I met her to a year later. She was a totally different person, and it was because she wanted to change. She wanted to be different. I had met girls before that. They were perfectly content with how they were, and that was fine. And then I put effort in to try to change them into who I wanted them to be. And then when I found the right person, there was things about her that I was like, well, these things could be different. And I didn't really put a whole lot of effort into them, but she changed them. And so if I could go back and tell the 20-year-old me, look, you're not going to change people, but they will change if they want to, that would have saved me a lot of effort and a lot of frustration. It would have probably just propelled me 3 or 4 years down the road. Something I eventually learned.
That's it's a lot of truth in that, man. You can't force people to do anything that they don't want to do, and it really is amazing. And about 4 years ago, my wife read a book, and it was called "Lord Change Me," and it was kind of about what you're talking about, how you can't change people, but you can change yourself and how you react and you respond and what you do, and in turn, hopefully, they will see that and want to change themselves.
And one thing that I love about the Bible is the more that you read and study the Bible, the more you realize that it covers every aspect of life. And there's a scripture where Paul's writing, and I don't remember what book it's in, but I believe it's Ephesians, and he says, "I get down on my knees and I pray that the love of Christ that you cannot understand, that you'll begin to understand that." In other words, what Paul was saying was, if the love of Christ would well up in your heart, you would be different. But I can't make that happen. So all I can do is get down and pray for you. That's it. And he says, I get down on my knees and I pray to the Father of all fathers that this love that you can't understand, that you would begin to understand it. In other words, what he was saying was, I can preach, I can jump up and down, I could smack you on the head, I could do all these things, and I'm not going to change a thing. But if the love of Christ would well up in your heart, everything would be different. Immediately, everything would be different. And I saw that somewhere in my 20s. I realized that's right. That's 100% right.
Mm-hmm.
Because I could take a sinner through 10-step programs, 12-step programs, teach them the word, all that kind of stuff. If they're still a sinner, if they've not had that change happen in their heart, I'm wasting my time. I literally am wasting my time until God gives you that new heart. There's nothing I can do.
Man, that's so true. You gotta, excuse me. They gotta want it. They gotta want to change, and they gotta be seeking it.
That's right.
That's some great advice for 20-year-old Luke.
Hey, before that is great advice, by the way. And before you get into your story, just it popped in my head and I'll forget. But I consider myself like an immature Christian. Like I'm not a guy who can quote Bible verses and stuff like that.
Mhm.
And sometimes I feel overwhelmed when I'm like, all right, I need to read the Bible today, and it's this giant book.
Yep.
Like, what do you have any advice for? Like, do I just go to the Proverbs and start there? I mean, I feel overwhelmed sometimes. Do I study it? Do I just grab a verse and just open at random? Any advice on when you feel lost
That's
like that or overwhelmed?
That's a wonderful question. That really is. And I think that's where a lot of people do get overwhelmed and eventually throw their hands up. I would say, number one, the Gospels, but specifically John. The Gospel of John is a great place. And then I go back to these because I never see myself as a Christian that's gotten past the basics. Meaning not that I continue to lay the foundation over and over again, but I'll remind myself. It's like when you're practicing sports and you go back to the fundamentals. Like even a professional goes back and works on the fundamentals over and over and over to make sure they still have them right. And John, to me, is a fundamental. And then number two is, you may not hear this one very often, but the book of James. It's not a very long book. It's 5 or 6 chapters, and it is probably the most practical book I have ever read. And what's crazy is Jesus was a very practical teacher. He was very practical. It wasn't any like crazy theology, all this and that. He's very practical. And the thing I like about practical is it's easy to implement. It's the most easiest thing to implement. So the teaching of Jesus, especially in John, and then the book of James, which James, funny thing, is the brother of Jesus. And it is so practical. See, the interesting thing about James is he didn't believe in Jesus while Jesus was alive, but he was converted. And so you
I
go
did
to
not know
James.
that.
Exactly. You go to James, and he was converted, began to lead the church there in Jerusalem, and was eventually martyred for his faith. In other words, he was surely converted, because you don't die for something you don't believe in. He was fully converted. And if you read James, it is so practical. It's these are the ways that you should live. And so, not that they're law, but what you do is you read these things and you say, okay, God, I see where I don't measure up. Can you change these things in me? And say, I want to be more like this. Is there something that I can do different? Can you change me? And it'll happen.
I like
One of
it.
my
That's great advice.
favorite
Thank you.
things about the gospel is that the gospel takes you, or the Christianity in general, following Jesus, takes you from glory to glory. What that means is you don't go 0 to 100 the moment you get saved. But it's a journey. You're going forward all the time. And see, when Jesus called his disciples, he said, "Follow me." He didn't say, "Be perfect right now." He said, "Follow me." And I think that all of our Christian journeys are following Christ, and that we just keep going and going and going. And then if you ever look back, you're like, wow, we've gone a long ways. And all I've been doing is following Jesus. And it's because he takes you from glory to glory to glory to glory. And it's amazing journey. And really, I don't personally, I don't stress about trying to be holier every day. All what I stress or what I'm focused on is just following Jesus. And if Jesus comes to me and says, "Hey, there's this thing you've been doing, and I'd like for us to handle this," I say, "Okay, Lord, if you give me the strength, I'm willing to do it." And then
That's so
these
cool.
things just start peeling off of you. And it's not that I
Wow.
come and say, "Okay, Lord, I know that now I need to deal with this." I come to Jesus, and Jesus says, "This is what we deal with now." And I do that through, I read his word, and something will just jump off the page at me. And it's like, okay, the Lord is really, this is really impacting me. This must be what we need to deal with next. And then I
Man,
just
that's
dive into
awesome.
word on it.
Man, you mentioned James. I flipped over to James while you were talking. That was just amazing. And you're right. It's very short. Mike, he wasn't lying. It's practical.
Mm-hmm.
There's like 5, 6 chapters or whatever, but the chapter headings, the titles, pretty much it's very practical. It's faith and endurance, a warning against prejudice, faith without good deeds is dead, controlling the tongue,
Mm-hmm.
true wisdom comes from God, drawing close to God, warning against judging others, warning about self-confidence, a warning to the rich, patience and endurance, the power of prayer, and restoring wandering believers. That pretty much covers it.
Yes. Sounds like I just need to get the book of James and just stick it in my pocket just every day. Control your tongue. Okay, I need to work on this.
That pretty much covers all the bases.
It
Okay, well,
does.
it's interesting that you said that. So I'm not sure exactly where it is, but I remember. I don't remember the location of scriptures a lot, but I remember the gist of them.
The address.
The address.
Yes, exactly, the address. But there's a scripture in the Old Testament, and I don't remember if it was Moses, who it was talking about how to teach the next generation the ordinances of God or the rules or the laws or whatever. And it really wasn't all day hammering it out. It was talk to your kids when you're traveling, when you sit down to eat, when you go to bed. It was like these little nuggets. You take these little nuggets at these different times in the day, and when you put them together, you have a huge you've gotten a huge vast knowledge. And that's what I do personally. I rarely ever do I ever sit down and just read the Bible for an hour, 2 hours, whatever. My mind doesn't work that way. But
Okay,
when
good.
I'm
Me too.
traveling, I listen to the Bible when I'm traveling. We read a chapter before we go to bed. When I'm waiting in a waiting room, I got the Bible on my phone. I'll read a few scriptures on there, and what it does is it takes that idle mind devil workshop thing, and it just retools it. And all of a sudden, and it's been crazy that sometimes the thing that I've listened to or I've read, see, Jesus said, "Give us this day our daily bread," meaning it was a daily thing because every day you need bread. You need to eat something every day. And it may not be a huge meal, but you need to eat something. And it's been crazy that the times where I've listened to something or I've read something in the waiting room was the very thing I needed that day. It was it. I
Boom.
didn't need, it would have been nice to have had all the books of the Bible. But what I needed that day was that piece of bread that I read. And it sustained me. It's been that way so many times. Especially I'll run into somebody else that needed that same bread, and I'm like, look, today when I was listening to the Bible, this is exactly what you need. I needed it. You need it now too. And then I've been a source
Great
for
advice.
letting the word run through me into others, and it's been amazing, really. That how can just reading the word while you're in a waiting room change your life and somebody else's? Well, it happens.
Wow.
That is certainly great advice, and it beats the heck out of doom scrolling Twitter and Facebook. So
It does.
I love that advice, and that's something that I think new believers or immature believers or whatever you want to call people like me, and there's a lot of us out there, type A's,
Mhm.
drink a few beers here and there. I cuss probably too much, but I love the advice because that helps work against that hard heart that you're
Yeah,
talking about. So that's great
definitely.
advice.
Well,
Love it.
and
I like
I've
the.
told a lot of people, like, and it's crazy to think of, but Jesus doesn't have a sin problem. God doesn't have a sin problem. He dealt with that. There was a sin problem, and he dealt with that sin problem. But but now what it is there's a relationship problem. That Jesus wants a relationship with you. There was a barrier, and it was the sin, and Jesus did away with it. And so Jesus wants this relationship with you, and hopefully you want this relationship with him. And just like when I have a relationship with my wife, when she and I got together, I've used this story many times. In my family, after you turn 18, birthdays weren't a really big deal, but in her family, birthdays are a
Hmm.
huge deal. Well, when we met, we were both over 18, and so her birthday came around, and I got her a little present, made her dessert, and all that. And she was mad. And like 2 days later, I finally figured out what is going on here. And finally, she busted the news to me like, that's not going to work. And I realized that my idea of birthdays and hers were not alike. And it wasn't even a sin. I didn't do anything technically wrong, but in our relationship, that wasn't going to work. And so I said, okay, I don't see anything wrong with that, with the way that I did birthdays, but because I love you and I want a relationship with you, I will do different next time. And so
Oh, I
next time
like
I
that.
did it, and our relationship grew. And so I changed this thing, and then I was rewarded by a closer relationship. And so then another thing, and another thing, and another thing. And many of the things that she's brought up to me, I don't see anything wrong with. Now, sometimes, yes, I've done wrong. I mean, more than should. And
No, no.
yes,
Surely
definitely.
not.
We may
Don't
get into
say that
some of
on
that.
the air.
We may even get into some of it. But there's been a lot of times where she's come to me and I've thought there was nothing wrong with that. But because I love you and I want a closer relationship with you, I'll do it. And there's been times that I've come to her and she's thought, he's crazy for what he's asking. But because I love him, I'll do it. And we've gotten closer and closer because of that. It's the same way with Jesus. That, you know,
Wow.
really, truly, drinking alcohol, it does talk about being drunk, but drinking alcohol, like having a drink, it's way I read the Bible. I don't think it's a sin. But if Jesus comes to you and says, "Hey, there's this thing," if he does that, then you're like, "Okay, you know what? We have this relationship, and I want to get closer to you." And you're saying there's this thing, and so we'll deal with it. If you give me the strength, I will deal with it. And then that's how
That's
you change.
wonderfully said.
I love
Wow.
it. That's a Yeah, I'm telling you, man. The right people get a hold of you on this podcast. Listen to you talk, man. Like I said, I've only talked to you for 15 minutes. I've been blown away. I
Do
love the
same
way
here.
you articulate things, and I think what's really good is that I think more people like me and my friends that are like I described earlier need to hear more people like you talk
Mm-hmm.
versus I don't know the old school way of just you've sinned, you're horrible, and
Yeah.
go away, and you're not worthy, you're a hypocrite, all that stuff. I like the way you describe things. So that's awesome. I could listen to you all day on that,
I,
man.
Yeah, and
I've
you've
really
given me an idea, Luke. You
was.
gave me an idea about the little pieces. I really took something away from that. Little pieces at a
Yes.
time
Mm-hmm.
throughout your day amount to a big thing. I
Mm-hmm.
struggle with sitting down and studying the word, but like
Mm-hmm.
Mike said, I do. I'm good at doom scrolling Twitter or X.
Yeah.
That's me. And so it just kind of gave me an idea there that maybe throughout my day a little bit, because I got the Bible on my phone too, to start replacing just a little bit of that doom scrolling with just a little bit snippets of James. Now that we've got, going to James, I really like that because I feel like that could make a difference for me. And I know there's probably a lot of guys like me out there that are terrible at sitting down and trying to. Today we're going to read John 4, 1 through 47, and we're going to.
Why do we feel that way though? Because it's been beating our heads our whole life that from like that old school mentality of, I don't even know if it's an old school mentality, but if you don't read this much, you're not doing enough. You're not. That's just goes back to this works mentality that I absolutely hate.
That's what we're getting. I think here's what I really think it is. Even though maybe the leaders or pastors or whatever we've heard in the past, maybe that wasn't what they were actually trying to say, but that's what we heard. Right. And maybe if you were to go back and ask them, they were like, "There's no way I heard that." But see, Satan's job is to twist what is being said. All the way back to the garden. Did God really say? And so, but what we heard was you got to work harder. But see, if you go to the book of Galatians, chapter 1, Paul is irate with the Galatians. And you know the reasons he's irate is because they went from grace back to works. He says, I can't believe it. He said, you were saved by grace, but now you're going to be perfected by works? What are you doing? And so in other words, what Satan had done was he had taken something that started off really well, and then he turned it into, but now you need to work more. You need to work more. You need to work more. This is the way you achieve holiness. This is the way that you stay saved, all that kind of stuff. And the goal of Satan is for you to work yourself out. And one day throw your hands up and say, I can't do this. I'm overwhelmed.
Give up.
Forget all of it. And that's his
goal. That's great to hear, man, because that's the way I feel sometimes. Sometimes I feel like I'm never going to be good enough. I suck. Sometimes I go into church and I look around. I'm like the dirtiest guy in here. Like these guys are all perfect. And do they know that I said a bunch of cuss words yesterday? I love Jesus and I'm trying to get better. And if you look at my life, I have gotten tremendously better and it's a journey, but I think the devil is so good at doing that. And it's just good to hear that from you, to remember that it's a game to get you into the ditch, to get you there and throw your hands up and quit. I love that advice, man.
That's exactly right.
We tell our people in our recovery class all the time that it's never over until you quit, until the devil gets you to say you quit. You can fall a bazillion times, but you got to get back up and keep marching forward.
That's crazy you say that.
When you fall and when you stay down is when it's over.
In Proverbs, it actually says, a righteous man falls 7 times, but gets up 8. What I found crazy about that verse is that he calls him a righteous man.
Keep on reading that verse.
What's that address?
I'll look it up.
But doesn't the rest of that verse say, but the evil man, what does it say?
It is Proverbs 24:16.
I'm almost there. Yep. I got it, boys. 24:16?
Yeah.
Okay. So it says 13, 14, 15, dead air, sorry. Okay, the godly man may trip 7 times, but they will get up again. But one disaster is enough to overthrow the wicked.
Yep.
Oh, man, that's good. Boy, I needed this today. This is good.
I like that, dude. I got to read it again. Man. The godly man may trip 7 times, but they will get up again. But one disaster is enough to overthrow the wicked.
Yep.
Bro, I needed this today. You have no idea.
Let's go.
What that says is,
give me that
godly
address.
Proverbs 24:16.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Luke.
All I would say was that it's just amazing that he's called a godly man, though he's fallen 7 times. Not once, not twice, not 3 times, 7 times. And it says a godly man. I take a lot away from that right there. That even though he had fallen, he didn't go from godly to ungodly, back to godly, but to ungodly, even though he had fallen. But he was continually godly because he continued to get back up. Meaning, if as long as you say, I am with God's power, I am going to get over this, then you continue to be godly. It's because it's not our righteousness, it's Christ's righteousness. He who knew no sin became sin so that we might be righteous. I believe that's in Romans. In other words,
love it.
Jesus' righteousness became our righteousness. And then that scripture in Proverbs says, and you'll continue to be righteous even if you fall, as long as you continue to get up.
Beautiful.
Don't give up.
That's right.
Love it, man.
Wow.
And what
you got to hear this good story, man.
What's so rewarding about all that is that during the week, during the work week, from in between the Sundays, we all fall. Every one of us. I mean, sometimes it's like you just did a steady decline getting to Sunday. If we could just hold out, we all fall.
That's so true.
So true. If Jesus can't use us, who are going to church on Sundays, who are still failing, who's he going to use? Is he going to wait on the perfect people? Because they're not
Look
coming.
at the people that he used in the Bible. They were far from perfect,
Exactly.
Wow.
What's crazy
Luke,
is you have.
Let's go ahead.
I was just one last thought. What you have. It's crazy is you have Peter, who has done all these things right after after he's been filled with the Holy Spirit and everything, and then down the line there, Paul comes to him and rebukes him to his face because he starts pulling back from the Gentiles and only eating with Jews, and Paul has to come and rebuke him. Peter could have easily just thrown his hands up and said, "Look, I've screwed up, and I'm not worthy of doing any more for the Lord." But he continued on. It was just he kept getting up.
Man.
Wow.
What's the difference between Judas and Peter? Judas gave up. Peter didn't.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't think about that. Man,
Dude, this is
another good one. Another good one, man.
That's right.
So, Luke,
Mike, you realize here, just real quick before we go into this, I just realized it. Me and Mike are getting schooled by the two youngins here.
I love it.
Okay, I mean, me and Mike are old as dirt.
Whatever.
And you and Chris graduated high school like 6 days ago.
Yeah.
And y'all are just like, you're
schooling the
schooling.
old codgers. And you know what? That's great. I love it. That's great.
That is
I'm
good.
finally not the youngest guy on the podcast.
Oh yeah. I learned
Chris
something
isn't
one
the
time.
baby.
I passed my CPA exam, and a lot of people get the big head when they do that in the accounting world. I'm a CPA now. I know what I'm talking about. Well, I was working in an office that I was with CPAs, non-CPAs, just all kinds. And there was a lady there that she wasn't a CPA. She didn't have an accounting degree, but she had a wealth of knowledge and a lot of experience. And I realized, and I learned more from her than probably anybody else. And I realized the moment that I think that I'm too good to learn anymore, or that I've passed or whatever, or that I look at the source of where I'm learning from, I'm frozen. I will never get any better. That's as good as I'll be. And if you'll stay humble and say, whatever the source is coming from, I'm willing to learn, then you'll continue to learn. Because Jesus calls these kids up to him and says, you've got to become as these kids if you're going to enter into the kingdom of heaven. You got to be humble. And that's the truth. You got to just continue to be humble.
That is so true, and especially in all career fields, you'll find people who they may not have the certificate or the degree, but man, do they have some life experience and just work experience that can teach you.
Mm-hmm.
And I know my wife's a CPA as well, and that's a hard test. And you could easily get the big head, start, putting his certificates up, and you're like, who is this person in the office? You don't have a certificate, and yet you're smart enough, even in your youth, to be able to realize, actually, she's holding a wealth of information. So that's awesome.
That's right.
Wise beyond your years, man.
Well, wisdom comes from one source.
That's right.
All we got to do is ask for it.
That's right.
So, Luke, we got you on here. We want to hear your story. Take us back to childhood, growing up in beautiful Atkins, Arkansas.
Go Big Red.
All right, yeah. So I'll hit a couple of high points. So I was drugged as a child. I was drugged to church. I started going to church 9 months before I was born. I've been in church my whole life. So I remember my earliest memories are at church. My dad's been a pastor as long as I can remember. Of course, he held other jobs early on. He wasn't solely a pastor, but he was a pastor and a teacher and did other things. And I can remember as a kid, of course, you always want to be like your dad, when you're a kid. So I can remember as a kid, I wanted to be like my dad. And I remember wanting to be a preacher and being 4 or 5 and imagining myself as a preacher and all that kind of stuff. And then I grew up a little bit and I realized that being a preacher is not all that glamorous, especially in a small church. I mean, you spend a lot of time doing non-preacher things, counseling, dealing with problems. People are mad at you about some of the silliest things. I mean, it's a tough job. I mean, unfortunately, it can be yes, it can be political at times. Unfortunately, I mean, it's a tough job. So I kind of fell out of that. I was like, I don't think I want to be a preacher anymore. I didn't know what I wanted to be, but I didn't think I wanted to be a preacher anymore, or a pastor or whatever. And so anyway, I grew, I kept growing. And then when I was 14, in 2009, I guess I was 15. It's been too long now. Anyway, I was a sophomore in high school. It was when swine flu was going around really bad. I joke and say it was the pandemic before last. 2 pandemics ago. It was a swine flu. And it was doing work on kids. It was bad. COVID wasn't so bad for kids. I mean, it was for some, but it was more of an adult issue. Swine flu was more of a kid issue. I mean, it was bad for some adults, but it was a kid killer. And I contracted swine flu and got a particularly bad case of it. It's in October of 2009. And I ended up, long story short, I was med flighted to Children's. I was put in a coma. I spent 10 days in a coma, 14 days on ventilator. I was awake 4 days on the ventilator and nearly died 3 times. They almost had to put me on life support. Lost a ton of weight. I was a big athlete at that time of my life, and I was in really good shape and lost all of it. I mean, all of it. And literally this is one of the times, this is before I really had a good foundation of biblical doctrine, I guess you could call it. But I remember in rehab, I spent 34 total days in hospital at Children's Hospital. I remember in rehab, See, before rehab, I was basically asleep and just laying there. I didn't have a lot to do. That part was really a story for my parents because I just laid there. I didn't have a lot going on. But they did a lot of praying during that time, and there was a lot going on for them. But then I go to rehab, and that all is on my shoulders. How hard are you going to push yourself? Well, I remember when I got moved into rehab, I was particularly down, as you would expect. And my dad, there was a whiteboard that was not being used right in front of my bed. And my dad had written down, we called it the confession board. And my dad had written down, I believe it was 10 things. There's a picture of it somewhere. Things that to confess over myself. And one of them was that I would run and not be weary, which that's scripture. That I had a 4.0 at that time, and that I would keep my 4.0 because at this time I'd missed a lot of school, and there was a lot of work that was going to have to be made up. That I'd be able to keep my 4.0. I mean, it was some of them were medical, like that this number would become this number. Some of it was like that. I don't remember it all, but at that time when I would get down, it was right in front of me. I would confess those things. I would say, I mean, not loud, but I would just say it out of my mouth. And what was amazing is every one of those things became true. Every one of them. I did all of the things that I would sit there and confess that I was going to do. And the scripture says, call those things that are not as though they are. Meaning, say out of your mouth what you believe is going to happen. And say it often. The scripture also says that Jesus is the high priest of our confession. That means he is the priest, or thinking back into biblical times, priest was the one that was kind of the leader of the religion. He's the high priest of our confession, meaning he rules over our confessions. And so, I got well, all those things, I got better. And so that was a physical time in my life where physically, Satan tried to kill me physically. So after that, everything was pretty well normal.
Let me stop you real quick right here, Luke.
Okay.
What you were talking about, being an athlete and playing sports during this time, and you're in the middle of school and you got a 4.0. So what sports were you playing during this time, and coming out of that, talk about that rehab out of that and what you got into after that?
Yeah. So I was I was playing football. It was actually football season when I got sick. I missed half of my sophomore season. I was playing baseball, and I'd just really gotten into lifting weights a lot. So I'd done one weight meet at that time. I really enjoyed lifting weights. And so whenever I was in the hospital, they had told my dad, because I don't know if I actually told exactly what had happened to me. I had swine flu, and it turned into pneumonia, and my lungs collapsed, and so I had a lot of lung issue. So the doctors told my dad, look, he'll never play football again. He may play baseball next season. But that was before the Lord had showed what he could do. And, I'll just go ahead and tell you the punchline. I played football. I never missed another game. And I played baseball that season. And one of the doctors who realized what was going on, actually at one time brought my dad a card with his number written down on it. Said, I know he's going to play baseball. Will you call me? I want to come to one of the games. And he did. So I pitched the opening day of baseball season in Dover. It was sleeting. It was 30-something degrees. The game should have been canceled. And I was still gaining weight. I had not fully recovered. And I remember, in one game we were playing Hector one time, and I was pitching a no-hitter. It was that season I had just come back. I was pitching a no-hitter, And the coach, I mean, I didn't take offense to this, so don't get mad at the coach for saying this, but he was hollering at his players in the dugout because I had to relearn how to walk. I had to relearn how to eat, all those kind of things. He was hollering at the coaches or at the players in the dugout saying, he just learned how to walk in November. Hit the ball.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so I
Awesome.
finished pitching a no hitter. I thought that was the greatest thing ever. But
Dude, that is so awesome. Luke, back up real quick. I got to know, because you said your first game back was you pitched opening day in the sleet at Dover.
Yep.
Tell me, we Atkins beat Dover.
No, we lost.
Oh.
So what happened was we were getting thumped, and there was another kid pitching. I don't even remember who it was. We were getting beat bad. And so the coach came to me and was like, "Can you pitch?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can pitch." So because he was trying not to pitch me the opening game because he was trying to let me get some more weight on me and all that. And I was like, I can pitch. So I went out there and finished the game. But
wow.
How much weight did you lose through all that?
So I was 164 pounds. And when I went into the hospital, and I was like 123 when I came out. And
wow.
So I lost like a quarter of my body weight. And it was like I was of course being a teenager, I didn't have a lot of fat on me. I was playing sports and running and all that kind of stuff. So it was mostly muscle that I lost. But I was able to put it back on really quickly. I had a Jamie McDougal who used to own a gym in Russellville. Gosh, he's like the professor. I mean, he showed up at the hospital because he had trained me before that. He showed up at the hospital and told my dad, like, I want to do his rehab. His wife was a PT. He's like, I want to do his rehab. I want to do his rehab. And so the day I got out of the hospital, he called my dad. I don't know how he got his number. He's like, can you have Luke at the gym tomorrow? And Dad's like, yeah. So I came to the gym. His wife eval'd me. I never saw her again. It was 5 days a week at the gym. So that was where I got back into lifting weights. And so when I went to do my final checkup after I had gotten out of the hospital and everything, I had to be released from the doctor. This was in January. I was already back to benching, like heavy. I was scheduled for a weight meet in February. So I go to the doctor in January. And the doctor's like testing my arm strength. She asked me to push, and so I pushed kind of slow. And then she's like, okay, and went to the other side. I was like, do you want me to push as hard as I can? She said, yeah. So she put my arm like this, and I pushed. And I guess she was thinking I was weak because I didn't push very hard with this hand. And I pushed her over. She almost fell on the floor. She's like, what have you been doing? I said, bitch. It's like, I really need you to release me. I got a weight meet in Missouri next week. So it was kind of funny. I mean, but by the time January rolled around, I was back to benching like 240 or 245 and I was a sophomore back by the time we got back to the check to be released.
What position did you play in football?
So I played a slot receiver position, and then I played my sophomore year. I played corner, but I moved to safety after that. But I mainly played defense my sophomore year because we had a rotation on the slot position. But I started at the corner position. And then after that, after I got well, I played safety. And I enjoyed playing safety because
he was knocking heads, baby.
Running the ball through the line, and I'd get about this high off the ground and just kneecap. I loved it.
Well, how was Atkins during that period? Because I know they've been ups and downs since I graduated. How were y'all during that period?
We didn't win a game from the time I went into the hospital until my senior year. Not one game.
Oh,
we went on a 15-game losing streak. And here's what the crazy thing is. So we played Pottsville the opening game my senior year. We had a new coach, and this guy was on fire. His name's Tommy Cody. He's still coaching in South Arkansas, I believe. So he had gotten hired my senior year as coach. Coach Sorrells had retired, and this dude had like ice water in his veins. So we would run after practice during the summer, and he would holler, "We haven't won a game in 15 straight games." And we're out there running, and he's hollering that while we're running gassers. So we played Pottsville, who Pottsville was way bigger than us. It was their last year's 4A, and we were 3A, a small 3A. We played Pottsville. It's non-conference. It was an amazing game, and we end up tying. And because it was non-conference, it didn't go into overtime. So the last time Atkins played Pottsville, it ended in a tie. And what's crazy is the junior high played, and their game ended in a tie. Amazing.
Oh, wow.
So we practice the next week. We're getting ready to do our conditioning at the end of practice. And our coach and everybody was like slapping our backs because we tied, everybody was all because we had been getting hammered before that. We go to run and our coach starts screaming, "We haven't won a game in 16 straight games." And we're running. We're like scared to death. Like, this guy's going to kill us. So we played Dover the next week, and we beat them by like 40. We were like, we're not losing this one.
Oh, wow.
I think we were up by 20 by the end of the first quarter. It
Let's
was crazy.
go.
So we ended up, we made the playoffs that year. We made the first round and got beat out, but it was a successful season for sure.
So what is that? What is that like? Because, and I know we're digressing, but I love football.
It's all right.
Coming from a period, like when I was in, we rarely lost.
Mm-hmm.
And so you didn't ever really feel the pain of defeat. What is that like mentally, preparing for Friday nights, having, just this negative and losing? You're still excited to play? I mean, how is that?
Yep. That is really good. So the psychology behind losing is interesting, and it is similar to the psychology behind winning. So I read a quote by Vince Lombardi that said, "Winning is a habit, but unfortunately, so is losing." And so we had gotten in a habit of losing. We would find a way to lose, and to snap out of a habit is a difficult thing to do. I mean, you have to be almost twice as good to finally snap the habit as you should be. Because we lost games that we should have just won, but we just would find a way to lose them. And it's really defeating. And what ends up happening is you really start getting focused on your own personal stats. So like the coaches would publish how many tackles each person on defense would have. And so we would end up getting competitive with each other about tackles, but didn't care how the game turned out. So we would end up like our focus totally was gone. And it ended up being to where it was almost humorous how bad we would lose. And that's when you get to that point, I mean, you got a long way to climb back out. And the new coach knew that. And that's why he did the way he did, because he was trying to create a habit of winning. And we did. We didn't lose a game. I mean, we tied our first game. Then we won 5 straight games. We didn't lose again until we played Charleston. And we were tied at half. And Charleston, I think, won state that year. And we were tied at half.
Wow.
And, I mean, we ended up barely losing to them. And we were
Was that Ty Story at Charleston?
Ty Story was a freshman that year.
Okay.
The year that I was a senior, he was a freshman.
Okay.
I don't know if he was playing with the high school team. They had a good quarterback, but Ty Story was a freshman. I think he still was playing with the junior high, but he played senior high baseball. So that's why I remember him, because I played against him in baseball. He was a great baseball player.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so the snap out, really to snap out of a losing streak or to a losing mentality, you have to really focus on doing everything right, not good enough. You have to do it 100%. And the phrase that the new coach had, Coach Cody had coined was running through the line. So when we would run, we were not allowed to let up 2 or 3 steps before the line. It was psychological. He was trying to break a psychological thing. And what's crazy is that has stuck with me my whole life. I now run through the line in everything that I do, 100%. I never let off the gas 2 steps before the finish line, ever.
How blessed are you to have gone through 2 years of losing and then to experience the change, man? That just taught you so much about life, man.
It really taught how to change what it takes to change an atmosphere or a mentality or whatever you want to call it. What it takes to change, and it takes. I mean, I don't want to say brainwashing, but it takes reprogramming, a different way of thinking, and you have to learn how to run through the line, and then if you don't, there has to be consequences. That you have to put consequences on yourself and others on your team. That if you don't run through the line, then we're going to run it again, and that's the way it is.
That's awesome, man.
And he pushed us all summer to excellence. And when we started playing with excellence. He was one of those people that wanted to play fast, and we would have parents come to the game or to the practices. And my dad was one of them. He had a stopwatch, and we would run plays at the end of practice. And my dad would, with a stopwatch, calculate how fast we were clipping off plays. And I mean, he's calling them,
Nice.
the quarterback's calling them, and we're getting lined up and running them every 12 seconds. We were running a new play every 12 seconds.
Oh my gosh.
It was fast.
That's cool.
And when we got into a game, we would run them every 20 seconds. And at that rate, we were fine, and the defense was dying. Because 20 seconds, we're like, why are we standing here? We should already ran 2 plays. But that
you know what?
He was
Thank goodness.
running it faster than we were going to do.
I'm glad they didn't have that crap when I played, because that would have destroyed me on defense, man.
It was
Good
effective.
Lord. Thank God they huddled up. They took an hour to get to the line. I could get my breath back. I could not imagine the kids today were having to play in that. That is a real deal, man.
Yes.
Wow.
But what I learned was he wanted our practice to be harder than what we were going to experience in the game. And when we got to the game, the first game, we were like, this is easy. Like we're not tired. And I was expecting to be tired because I'd always been tired. But we weren't tired.
Right.
The other thing he did, and
That's
this has
awesome.
also followed me, was he demanded that we had all new uniforms. He would dictate, we're going to wear this color socks. You're going to have this color cleats. We're going to look this way, because he said, if you look good, you'll feel good, and then you'll play good. And that's what we did.
Yeah.
We looked good.
I love that,
We felt
man.
good. We played good.
That's a military thing.
Yep.
I believe that too, man. 100%.
Yes.
That's
Same
absolutely
way in the military, or police work, you look sharp, you feel good, you have confidence, you look good, you present
That's right.
well. That's a great concept.
It's kind of a get off my lawn moment here, but I hate, like in basketball now, where they're wearing everybody's got different shoes and everybody's got all the
Get off
Don't
my
get me-
lawn moment.
Yeah, don't get me started. I miss uniformity. Everybody looks sharp, Yeah. Oh, don't even get me started, dude. I can't stand it. It's really bad in basketball, but yeah.
Well, what you get is you get a lot of eyes, and not a lot of us, because of that. If everybody looks the same, it's not that it's degrading, but it makes you a group. You're a group. You get a group mentality. But when you start getting these, well, I got these cleats and you got those cleats and we're doing this and that, it starts ended up being some eyes, and that's where you start looking at individual stats. Yeah, we're losing, but I'm going to the next level, all that kind of stuff, and you quit looking at the team. I mean, that's where we're at with NIL, and that's a whole can of worms. But
here we go.
It's the mentality.
That's what's happened.
It's the mentality of kids today, because I found it hard at work. It was the standard to have your boots shined and to be clean shaven. I mean, that's the standard. And through the years, I noticed it degrading. And
Yeah.
then being the only guy who would still enforce that, they're like, oh, he's old. You really think your uniform's going to matter if you get your butt kicked by somebody? And I'm like,
Yeah.
you people. I mean, you try to teach them. Just boots look like they've been run through a grinder. They're gray when they're supposed to be black. And coming to work looking like a drunk. With the hair all. I just drove me nuts, and it just kind of toward the end. Whenever I left the streets, I just almost got to the point. I was like, I'm just exhausted of trying to
Yeah.
be one of the few who enforce this.
But it starts
Because
feeling
it
like
becomes a
you're
culture
walking
problem.
upstream.
Yes,
Because everybody's
it's like,
going this
forget
way
it.
and you're going that way.
Yeah.
It just gets exhausting.
So we're at senior year of high school, graduation, all that. You got a pretty big accolade your senior year. Talk about that and moving into college and all that.
So one of the things on my confession board was that I would keep a 4.0, and I did. I kept a 4.0. I graduated valedictorian. I got a scholarship to go to tech, and I did. It's funny. I ended up in accounting. Excuse me. I ended up in accounting because you had to name a degree, and accounting is at the top of that list because it's AC. And so I just wrote the first thing down on the top of the list, accounting, because I was like, well, the first 2 years is just the same anyway. So that's how I ended up in accounting. I finally got into accounting classes and I liked it. Years later, I was talking to my mom and she was like, son, I told her that. She said, I thought it was because every male on my side of the family is an accountant. I said, what? I didn't, my grandfather practiced as a lawyer, but he has an accounting undergrad. His dad owned an accounting firm in Atkins. I never met his dad. He passed away before I was born. I didn't know any of that. I was like, no, Mom, it was because it was at the top of the list. So that's how I ended up an accountant. Thank goodness God has his hand on us and guides us in the right direction, because who knows where I would have ended up. So I was able to keep my scholarship, which is tough when you're in school and there's so much else going on and everybody else around you is, doing other things, and to the effort that it takes to keep your scholarship. But I learned how to bust habits. I'd learned that. I learned how to do that. And so that followed me. So I was able to keep my scholarship and everything. And then I graduated, which to be a CPA, you have to take extra hours. So I took summer courses, and then I was able to take one more semester instead of having to take two, which is normally the way you have to do it. I only had to take one additional semester after I had all my hours. So I ended up graduating in the fall. I graduated and immediately started working on my CPA. Passed it in a year. So I passed my CPA exam. I guess the first test I took was that September because I worked through the spring. Then I started studying through the summer. The first test I took was in September. I finished it up the following September. That was once again just dedication. I because I learned that I learned in nuggets, like I told y'all earlier, and so I would study for the CPA exam 2 hours a day. I would study on my lunch break, and I'd study 1 hour after work, and I did that every day. I studied 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. I studied on Christmas Day. That was how I did it. But I never missed a church service. I never missed a workout. I never missed a birthday. I didn't miss any of that. Now, when you didn't see me, I was studying. It was 2 hours a day, every day, 7 days a week. I woke up at 6:30 on Christmas Day and worked and studied 6:30 to 7:30. So then I get to go do Christmas afterwards.
That test is really hard too. I mean,
Yes.
My wife's an extremely smart person, so I don't know if the casual observer, why I got a CPA license, they really understand how difficult it is, and a lot of people fail multiple times before they get it.
Yes.
Do you? Do you use your CPA now? Are you practicing with it,
Yes.
or?
So I am a I'm a tax preparer or tax professional. I do income tax, payroll, sales tax, all that kind of stuff. I worked for a firm in Russellville for 10 years. So when I was in school, I heard that there was a firm in Russellville that was very prestigious. It was Kent Dollar CPA, and I went and I dropped a resume off there, and I said I want to work here, and not thinking anything about it. I just dropped, and then 6 months later, I get a phone call. Well, so he had called me and asked me to come in and talk to him. Well, I find the backstory later about all this. He had lost my resume, and one of the secretary had to remind him that I'd even dropped it off. He was needing somebody just to make copies, and he had asked everybody he could think of to do it, and they turned him down. So I was the last resort. So he called me, and I ended up getting hired, and I worked there all through college. I started doing taxes before I was graduated. I started taxes my junior year in college.
So like an internship, literally.
Yeah. I'd done
Awesome.
taxes for 2 years when I graduated. I graduated on a Wednesday. The following Monday, I went to work full time. I never missed one day of work. And so I worked there until last July. The Lord moved me to another firm. And I wouldn't have moved unless the Lord moved me. I mean, because I don't like a lot of change. And then I moved to another firm. But the Lord is literally just like taking me through all these steps in my life. Just pick me up and move me to the next one. Pick me up, move me to the next one. And when I look back, I'm like, how in the world did that happen? I mean, it was like splitting hairs. I mean, this was so precise, but it's happened over and over.
We want to thank Luke for coming on the show today. His story is so good, and we've decided to cut it into 2 shows. So this week is going to be part 1, incoming, part 2 next week.
Yes.
Thank you all for listening, and keep fighting the good fight.
Let's go.
See you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Life After Sunday podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Please give us a like and a comment, and go follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Rumble. And as always, keep fighting the good fight.